Okay, so good afternoon, dear students. Welcome to our first virtual class. Before I proceed, may I request everyone to mute your microphone to avoid unnecessary noise and distractions. And please observe proper behavior during our virtual class and turn off your video as well. Now, let me introduce myself to you. I am Maria Ana C. Robles, your online learning coordinator or your OLC. So I am, you can call me Ma'am Anne. I am one of the faculty members of College of Arts and Sciences at AMA Malolo City, Bulacan. Okay, so for our course code, we have here UGRD ENG 6332 42113T, and this is teaching English in elementary grades through literature. Okay, so our topic for this afternoon, for week 1, we have introduction to English or introduction to literature in English. Okay, so for our learning objectives, at the end of the discussion, we will be able to explain what literature is and then differentiate the two major divisions of literature by giving examples and then give the importance of literature. Okay, so these are our learning objectives. Let us now begin. Okay, so introduction to literature in English. Now, the study or appreciation of literature is very interesting and helpful to learners as well as for teachers for many reasons. First, literature in English involves the reading and analysis of written materials of different kinds, including fiction and non-fiction written works in English. Okay, and then all learners of literature in English should be ready to analyze whatever they read critically by the end of studying literature. Now, what is literature? So let us first define literature. Okay, so what is literature? Now, it is very difficult to offer a precise definition of literature, but we shall give a working definition of it in line with what we will be studying. Okay, now literature here can be defined as pieces of writing that are valued as works of art, especially novels, plays, and poems. Now, etymologically speaking, literature, the word literature is derived from the Latin term or the Latin word litera, which means letter. Okay, so writers make use of letters in writing literary works. Now, when you say etymology, it refers to the origin or derivation of a certain word. So this term literature is derived from this Latin word litera, which means letter. Now, literature has been defined differently by various writers. Okay, so I have here 4 definitions. Okay, now that it is an artistic representation of life in different forms of expressions. So meaning to say, literature or literary works are creatively and artistically represented by the different authors and writers which can be described as written and sometimes spoken materials. Okay, and it is also defined as preserved writings of a country or people. Preserved. What do you mean by preserved? Okay, now it is preserved writings because these writings or literary works are handed down from one generations to another, and it has been maintained. So this has been maintained and kept alive up to this time. Okay, so there are stories, novels, poems that we had before. Okay, until now, so they are preserved writings. It is also defined as the embodiment of nations' traditions, customs, and cultures. Now, this is the collection of creative writings of a particular nation, of a particular group, culture, language, or period in history. Okay, and lastly, it is a vehicle of experiences, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and attitudes about a given subject or topic. Okay, meaning to say, literature is where we can transport our experiences, our thoughts, uh, our feelings, and even our attitudes. Okay, um, so those are some definitions, and we have here another one. It is the body of written works produced in a particular language, country, or age, or the body of writings on particular subject. Okay. Looking at the previous dictionary definitions of literature, we may define literature generally as any body of written works that is written and produced in any country, language, for a specific purpose such as information, education, entertainment, which can be fictional or non-fictional in nature. However, in literature in English as a subject, our main concern is on the first, is on the definitions, the real definitions of literature. Okay? Now, what are the importance of literature? Okay? Literature improves our command of language. It teaches us about the life, cultures, and experiences of people in other parts of the world. And it gives you information about other parts of the world which you may never be able to visit in your lifetime. How? By reading them, by studying them. Okay? Now, it entertains us and provides useful occupation in our free time. So it is a source of pleasure. Okay? It makes us wiser and more experienced person by forcing us to judge, sympathize with, or criticize the characters you are reading. Okay, perhaps in the novels, short stories, poems, fables, etc. Okay, it helps you compare your own experiences with the experiences of other people, and it gives information which may be useful in other subjects, for example, in geography, in science, history, social studies, and so on. Okay. Literature in general is very important to all readers, although you may not take literature in English as an examinable subject at school. Now, reading is in fact very much part of language learning. This will, among other things, improve our command of the English language if we read widely. Okay. Now, teachers of the English language should encourage their students to read widely by using their community libraries, if they are in school, or better yet, now that we are on the pandemic, we are encouraged to read through the use of the internet and other reading materials, for example, modules. Okay. Okay. Now, what are the qualities of a good literature? Okay. Literature should have a theme. It should explain the relevance of the theme, and it should have a compelling idea. And of course, it should have a good style and uses correct grammar as well. And it should sound genuine. Okay, so remember these qualities of a good literature. So having discussed the definitions and its importance, let's move on to the two main divisions of literature. So what are the two main divisions of literature? So we have here prose and we have here poetry. Okay. Now, let us differentiate the two. Now, in terms of form, prose is written in paragraph form, whereas poetry is written in stanza or verse form, just like poems. Okay. Now, in terms of language, prose is expressed in an ordinary form. Okay. Making use of sentences and paragraphs. Okay. Whereas poetry is expressed in metrical, rhythmical, and we often use figurative language like metaphors, simile, hyperbole, and others. So in terms of appeal, prose appeals more to the intellect, or more of the mind, or more of thinking, whereas poetry appeals more to the feelings and emotions. Okay, it appeals more to the heart of both the writer and the readers. Okay, now in terms of aim, prose aim is to convince, to instruct, imitate, and reflect. Whereas poetry is to steer the imagination of the readers, or to stimulate the feelings, or to arouse the emotions of the readers and set an idea of how life should be. Okay, so these are the two main divisions of poetry, literature, prose and poetry. Now, prose can be fiction or non-fiction. Okay, so what is fiction and what is non-fiction? Now, when you say fiction, this is not true. This is just based on the imagination of the writers. Okay, so for example, short stories, legend or alamat, fairy tales, folk tales. Now, children love short stories. They love legend. They love fairy tales. So generally, they love fiction. Okay. And then non-fiction, on the other hand, is based on facts. They are based on truth. They exist in real life situation. Okay. For example, report, narratives, memoirs, letters, articles, journals, and biographies. Okay. So that is fiction and fiction. Now, what are the different types of prose? Okay. Now we have here short story. Short story is a brief form of fiction dealing with a simple and single plot. Usually, short story can be finished in just one sitting only. That makes it short. Whereas novel is an extensive prose divided into chapters. Okay. Now, essay is an expository prose written uh, or it is an expository prose composition which explains an idea, theory, or point of view. Okay. So in writing an essay, we expose a topic or theme. Okay. And then legend. Okay. Legend is a story about origins or alamat, and it is usually fiction. And then fable. It is a brief story that tells a lesson or moral. Now, the characters in the fable are usually animals, but they are given human characteristics. Example of fable, the story of the turtle and the monkey. Are you familiar with that? The story of the grasshopper and the ant, and so on. And then plays or drama. It is a story presented on stage with acts and scenes. Okay, it can be drama or the tear-jerking one. It could be comedy. It could be tragedy, epic, adventure, or horror. Okay, so another form of prose is the news. Okay, news is a report of everyday events in our society or in our environment. What is the latest news nowadays? Okay. And then we have here a biography and autobiography. Biography is a record of one's life written by other person, whereas autobiography is a record of one's life written by the person himself. Now, diary, another one is diary. It is a personal account of important events in the writer's life. And usually this diary or personal journal is accomplished daily. Do you have a personal journal? Or you just place or write it in your FB timeline? Okay. And then we have letter. It refers to the actual written communication. Okay, so these are the different kinds or forms of prose. Okay, now let's move on to the types of poetry. So poetry could be dramatic, lyrical, or narrative poetry. Now, dramatic poetry, or let's have first lyrical poetry. It expresses personal thoughts and emotions, usually with the accompaniment of lyre, lyre or any string instrument. That makes it lyrical poetry. And then we have dramatic poetry. It dramatizes action through dialogue or monologue. And then narrative poetry, it is a kind of poetry that narrates or tells a story. Okay. Now, here. Okay. Okay. So now, what are the different kinds of lyric poetry? Okay, now, as I said a while ago, lyric poetry is an expression of poets' personal feelings, originally intended to be sung to the accompaniment of lyre or any string instrument. For example, the famous Leron Leron Sinta, what else? Parang Bukid. They can be sung and they can also be recited. Now, what are the different forms of lyric poetry? So we have folk songs or awiting bayan. These are poems intended to be sung, and sonnets. It is composed of 14 lines dealing with emotions and idea. And we have elegy. What is elegy? It is a mournful poem which expresses feelings of grief, melancholy, in which the theme is about death of someone. So in other words, elegy is a poem for the dead. And then ode, it is a poem of praise or glorifying uh, an event or individual. Okay, so and another one is psalms or dalit, a sacred song or poem used in praising or worshiping God. And lastly, we have corridos, measures of 8 syllables or octosyllabic and recited to a marital beat. For example, uh, Ibong Adarna in Philippine literature. Okay, so what are the forms of narrative poetry? Now in here, we narrate a story or incident which follows a chronological order. So when you say chronological order, it follows the correct sequencing of events from first to last. So we have ballad. It is a simple and short poem composed to be sung. We have epic. It is a long narrative poem about heroes and gods. We have also metrical romance. So when you say romance, it is a love story in verse with the adventure of knights and the lords and their ladies during the age of chivalry. And then metrical tale, it is a poem about ordinary folks and origin. Now, the last one is dramatic poetry. Since it is dramatic poetry, it encompasses a highly emotional story that is written in verse and meant to be recited. And this would include a dramatic monologue and rhyme in verse. Okay, so these are the three types of poetry: the lyric, the narrative, and the dramatic poetry. Now, generally, literature is divided into two genres, okay? Two genres, namely fictional and non-fictional literature. Now, as I said a while ago, fictional literature is imaginary, composed writing or work of art that is meant to provide information, education, and entertainment to the reader. In other words, fictional literature is based on the writer's imagination rather than reality. Now, non-fictional literature is factual writing or written work that it gives facts that can be proved, as it provides real places, events, characters, times, or reality rather than imaginary things. Okay, so fiction and non-fiction. Example of fictional language or fictional literature include plays, poems, short stories, novels, oral literature, and songs. Now, examples of non-fictional literature include autobiographies, biographies, essays, diaries, journals, magazines, newspapers, and others. Okay. Now, so sum up, literature is divided into two major divisions, which are prose and poetry. Now, we have two literary genres. We have fiction and non-fiction. We have also made mention on the different kinds of prose and the different kinds of poetry. Okay, now our what do you call this one? Our course is teaching English in elementary grades through literature. Okay. So how can we teach elementary grades? How can we teach English in elementary grades using this literature? Okay. So as we go on with our lesson, we might as well uh, uh, know how. Okay. Now, before I end, I would like to share with you a quote from Northrop Fryer about literature. According to him, literature speaks the language of the imagination, and the study of literature is supposed to train and improve the imagination. And literature adds to reality. It does not simply describe it. It enriches the necessary competencies that daily life requires and provides. And in this respect, it irrigates the deserts that our lives have already become, according to C.S. Lewis. Okay, so that concludes our discussion about the introduction of literature in English this afternoon. Thank you for attending our virtual class. Keep safe, everyone, and God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you po.